Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I'll be talking about fertilizer in the garden. Um, Anybody who's been to a garden center, walking through that garden area, the fertilizer area, it's overwhelming with the choices there and what all the numbers on the packages mean. And I'm hoping to demystify that today with you guys, talk a little bit about what those numbers are, what they mean, what plants prefer which nutrients. I'll talk a little bit about organic versus synthetic fertilizers and what the best use cases are for both. Um, Wanted to go through a couple of scenarios where the general approach might need to be tweaked a little bit. I'll cover all of that. But that's pretty much oh yeah, and one more thing, I wanted to give everybody an easy trick that I learned years ago about how to remember the NPK and what it means and who needs what. So I'll share that with you today as well. And if all else fails, if you remember that piece, you're ahead of the game already. So let's jump in. We'll start with what those three numbers mean, and I have all my containers in front of me, so I'll refer to them as we go through this video. So I'll use this as an example. So the NPK, you'll see on any container of fertilizer, whether it's a bag, a container, a liquid, whatever it is, you'll see that it has three numbers separated by hyphens. So in this particular case, and it's always in the same order, it's always NPK, so it's nitrogen, the first number. The second number is P, which is phosphorus, and the third number is K for potassium. Now, the easy trick that I've always just as a quick reminder to know what they are, regardless of what you're growing in the garden, NPK, it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or the way that I remember, it's up, down, and all around. So up meaning the first number. Let me get an example here. So up, down, and all around for the three numbers. Up is nitrogen. It's anything that you're growing above the ground, anything that's green, leafy, anything that the plan is to eat, the stuff that you're growing that's growing above the ground. So lettuce, cabbage, kale, spinach, anything of that nature, they are nitrogen cravers. So that's your first number. Your second number is phosphorus. So that's the down. That's anything that's you're growing. Now there's a little star next to that, and we'll get to that in a second. Root veg, carrots, turnips, beets, anything that you're growing where the roots are crucial, and flowering or fruiting. So that's where the P, a higher P nutrient, becomes critical to their success and their growth and their being able to thrive. And the third number is the K, is the all around. So it's up, down, all around. All around is it's overall general health of the plant. It helps with water uptake. It helps with disease resistance. It's just one of those general all-purpose, keeps plants healthy. It's kind of like that backstage crew member where they're essential. They're quiet, but they're essential for a great performance. And some of the things that I have notes today, because there's a lot to cover. Things that like potassium, are potatoes. It improves the tuber quality. For tomatoes, they'll have better flavor. All around, just better disease resistance. Improves fruit size, flavor, all of those things. So potassium, that's one of the things that's good for all plants, is the third number. Nitrogen, it's your leafy greens. It's anything that you're growing above the ground. That's your up, including grass. So I know it's not a crop, but grass loves nitrogen because it's leafy, right? And then your second one, the second number is your phosphorus, which is below the ground, plus fruits and flowers. All your root veg, anything that fruits, tomatoes, peppers, melons, anything of that nature. Flowers, if you're a flower gardener. So anything like that. So if you just keep up, down, all around in your mind when you're shopping for things, it's a good baseline to go by. Now, I did want to talk about synthetic versus organic. So synthetic fertilizers they're man-made. They are processed to deliver nutrients fast. That's the goal. They feed the plants. If we compare that to an organic fertilizer, those are generally made from natural resources, compost, worm castings, plant matter, things like that. They feed both the plants and the soil, but they do it in a over time, gently, and it's not as targeted a treatment. Let's do pros and cons. So, as an example, I've got a couple of synthetic fertilizers here. Here's one, and here's two. We're very familiar with the yellow bottles. Those are synthetics. And there's nothing wrong with synthetics. And I'll get to it in a second, where there's certain cases where synthetics make more sense, whereas in other cases, the organic fertilizers make more sense. So let's talk about synthetics. Pros: quick nutrient release. Like if you need to get something into your plants quickly, synthetic is the way to go. It's almost immediately absorbed by the plants. A lot of the times, or most of the times, they're water soluble. So you mix them into your watering can with water, mix it up according to the directions. That's always important. And when you apply them to your plants, the plant drinks up the water, including the nutrients that you just gave it, and it's immediate. Like the results are very, very fast. So that's one of the good things about a synthetic fertilizer over an organic. They have more precise nutrient ratios. So here's another example of a flower one where I've got it's a 15-30-15. This has got high P, which is high phosphorus, which is high for roots, flowers, and fruit. So they're just more precise in the way that they're made, just because they're man-made. They're specific. They're specifically made according to a specific ratio of nutrients. And they're also easy to apply. I mean, you mix it in with water and you put it on your plants. It's relatively easy to apply, and you find them everywhere. They're very easily, found and widely available. Now, the cons to synthetics are it can lead to salt buildup in the soil. And I want to put a little star next to that, because if improperly used, right? So like if you're overfeeding or if you're not following the directions on the containers, there's a higher risk of that ever happening. But it is something to be aware of. It can disrupt your soil microbiome over time. Like if you're just constantly only using synthetics, that can become a problem with the quality of your soil. We'll get to that in a second as well. And sometimes it may lack micronutrients. Now, I'm not going to get into too much of that in this video. That's a whole other conversation. But because they're so focused on the NPK and getting those specific nutrients to your plants quickly, some of the other nutrients may not be as present, let's say. All right, synthetic. Let's go over to organics. So organic is they're not man-made. They're generally from plant matter. All of those things that we've seen everywhere: bone meal, worm castings, plant matter, anything of that nature, compost. All of those things are considered organics. Now, the cool thing about organics is that it doesn't just feed the plants. It feeds the soil and the plants, tries to keep things healthy, but it does it slowly, gently, over time. So let's do the pros and cons. Pros for organic fertilizers are: improves your soil structure and provides healthy microbes. So you're consistently feeding your soil slowly, gently, over time by applying organic fertilizers. It does it slowly, releases the nutrients slowly and steadily. So these are the things like you have the granules that you spread. You work it into the soil, you water it in, and it just slowly releases nutrients over the course of several weeks. And then it supports your long-term soil fertility. So only using one or the other, you know what? I'll leave that to the end. Let's keep going. So the cons to the organics: they're slower to act, results are not immediate. The other thing about organics is that the nutrient levels are not as predictable. Because they're coming from natural sources, it's not a specific scientific formula that they're following. So it's a little bit less precise than a synthetic fertilizer would be. And then if they're not composted properly, it may attract pests. Now, I haven't seen this myself. Like if you apply too much bone meal or too much of one thing or the other, or if we know that manure, if not composted properly, can cause a problem. But that's another thing just to keep in mind. An analogy that I liked that I heard a while ago to differentiate between synthetic and organic fertilizers are your synthetics are more like fast food. They're quick and they're satisfying, but they may not be great long term. Whereas your organic fertilizers are more like a balanced home cooked meal that they're slower, but they're nourishing in deeper ways. And I thought that was a really cool analogy. And to me, I use both, and I'll explain a little bit about what my process is. You know what? Let me do it now. So what I do is I add compost and a slow release organic fertilizer at planting time. So I know that I've got my compost there for my soil. I've got my slow release organic fertilizers at the beginning, which I know are going to be slowly released over the next 4 to 6 weeks at planting time. I'll get all my seedlings in. I'll plant what I need to plant. And I will apply the granules about every 4 to 6 weeks. Meanwhile, I'll apply a synthetic based on what I'm growing there every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on, what time of the season. Like a seedling will need less than a full-grown plant, as an example. And then depending on what that crop is, I'll either pick something that's balanced, like a 20-20-20, or I'll pick something that's for root, flower, fruiting, if it's something like tomatoes or whatnot. And I'll start applying that particular one when flowering starts or when fruiting starts, or just to, make sure that it's there when they need it, that I'm not applying it when it's not necessary. What else do I do? If there's a problem, if you're noticing an issue, and that's another spot where synthetics are really strong. So let's say you're halfway through the season and you start seeing a problem with one of your crops, whether it's like small leaves or low yield or something like that. And I'll go through some of the different signs of deficiency. But that's when a synthetic can nip that in the bud quickly, because the plants are going to suck it up immediately and it'll start to take effect right away. Now, obviously, you're not going to see, like a little lettuce on one day, you apply your synthetic fertilizer and then this amazing lettuce the next day. But it's still much, much quicker than if you were just relying on organic methods. So when it's trouble spots or if you have issues, I find that using a synthetic really helps target those specific treatments when you know what the problem is. If you don't know what the problem is, keep listening. I'm going to get to science, ways to figure out what the problems could be. And I'm just going to focus on common NPK deficiencies. There's a whole slew of other micronutrient deficiencies, but I mean, we don't have all day, guys. So we're just going to focus on the most common. Okay. Important things to remember. Yes, obviously, like if you're using something, any container, just make sure that you follow the directions. Overfeeding doesn't help anything. Giving them more food can actually harm the plant. You don't want to do that. Just make sure, like with any fertilizer, just make sure that you're following the ratios, you're following the instructions on the container, and you can't go wrong. And then worst case scenario, if all of this is super confusing and you're like, you know what, this is not for me, I find it too complicated, just go with a 20-20-20, 10-10-10, a balanced fertilizer for everything, and you'll be fine. And then it's only if you have like a specific problem that you're dealing with that you might have to do something differently. But if you're growing a lot of different things, relying on a basic balanced where the numbers are all the same, it's totally fine. And for the most part, I do that except for my roots and my fruiting. I like to give them a little extra boost just to make sure that the fruits are good. Tomatoes in particular, I'm a fan, big tomato fan. So I want to make sure that those are okay, that they're going to come out okay. All right, we talked about this. Yeah, like those issues about just making sure that you follow the instructions on whatever fertilizer you're using avoids issues like the salt buildup or excess nutrient or wasting it. Like you don't want to buy a whole container and then overfeed more than you need, and then you'll have to buy again because you've run out. You also don't want to do that. So we don't want to waste fertilizer, because not that they're super expensive, but the bigger your garden, the more you're going to use. So keep that in mind. All right, best practice is using your organics as your baseline for your soil. And that's usually the granular. And there's all kinds of different things. Like I mentioned before, your compost, the granular ones, which is what I typically use, other than compost at the beginning of the season. And I'll get to there's two scenarios where that process might be a little bit different. High level general concepts are the same, but in these two scenarios, you just have to do things just slightly different in terms of the timing. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, use your organic granular as your baseline soil builder, and then use your synthetic every 2 to 3 weeks as your gradual targeted booster over the course of the season to make sure everybody's got what they need. And really, you only need to apply it if you're noticing that your plants need it. If you've got, smaller leaves than they should be, or the growth isn't as quick as you expect it to be, little things like that. Okay, let's talk about those two scenarios. So everything that I've talked about so far, it's either, in the ground, in raised beds, where there's enough soil there that it'll hold the nutrients and do what it needs to do. The two scenarios where things are slightly different are if you're growing in containers, like a pot. I don't know if you can see them. I've got some on the deck there. Oh yeah, you can see. When you're doing that, because there's less soil than you would have in the ground or in a raised bed, that's going to dry out faster. That means that you water it more often, which means that any nutrients that are there leach out more quickly. And it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just, it is what it is. So when you're growing in containers, it's the same thing. So when you're potting up your container, put in your potting soil, you mix in your slow release organic fertilizer at the beginning, plant your stuff. And then normally I wouldn't reapply. Like normally it says like 4 to 6 weeks. But I'll probably do it every 6 to 8 weeks in a container for the slow release. For the synthetic, it's every 2 to 3, and then switch to a fruiting one if you're growing something like tomatoes or melons or peppers or something like that's producing a fruit. And do that every 2 to 3 weeks, which is very similar to in the ground, but it's just a matter of being aware that any nutrients that are there, you might see signs more quickly that it needs something, because especially if you get a lot of rain, if you have to water it a lot, if you live in a really warm climate and you're watering constantly, the amount of fertilizer that you're applying is directly related to how much water is flushing everything out of that container. So just something to be aware of. The other situation that requires something a little bit different is if you're succession planting like I do. Now, succession planting is, let's say I grow in raised beds. Let's say in the springtime, I've got radishes in a spot in my garden. And then when they're done, I take those out, I plant something else. I take whatever that is, let's say turnips. And then when they're done, I'll plant something else. So with that heavy rotation in between crops, you're going to want to add compost before you plant your second crop. And that's just to replenish the soil nutrients that may have been used up by the radishes. And it's just to make sure that they each like any crop that you're putting in there has the best start, has as many nutrients as it can. And then you just continue with your periodic organic granular and your liquid water soluble synthetic as you would from that planting day. So slight comment, like the general concepts are the same, but just something to keep in mind. Okay, now let's talk about deficiencies in N, P, and K and what that looks like and some of the signs to look out for. So nitrogen, if any kind of nitrogen deficiency, that's the pale and stunted, right? That's the thin, spindly stems, small leaves, anything that's up, right? Up, down, all around. Anything that's up, that's not as it should be. So your smaller than usual leaves, thin, spindly stems, leaf drop, usually starting from the bottom of the plant up. And I'll get to why that is in a second. So anything like that. Now, one of the extra things to notice is that if the plant is stressed or there's a lack of nutrients, It may flower prematurely, so it'll bolt prematurely, not weather related. So that's those are some of the small signs where if your plants have a nitrogen deficiency, those are some of the things to be on the lookout for. The P, potassium, no, phosphorus. So up, down, all around. P is the down, roots, flowers, and fruits. Roots, flowers, and fruits. That's the that's the slow and moody one. So you may see purplish or reddish stems or underneath the leaves. That's more common in tomatoes and brassicas. So you might see that as a deficiency in phosphorus. If your flowers are delayed, and this is a tough one for a new gardener because you don't know, well, they should have flowered by now. Like if you've had experience, you kind of know what plants are flowering when. And then poor seed or fruit development. So if things aren't producing as they should, it's a hint that there's something else going on, that there's a lack of some kind of nutrients going on. And then the extra tip was that in cool spring soils, phosphorus uptake slows down. Even though it might be there, it's just slower if it's in cool spring. I live in an area, especially this year, that was really cool. It was a long, cold spring. So that's the P. The K deficiency, that's the potassium, that's the third number. That's the all around. It's the crispy edges on your leaves. You've got leaf edge looks scorched or burned or things like that. Weak stems that flop over. What else? Increased pest or disease issues due to poor stress tolerance. So the potassium, it's the all around. It battles disease. It keeps pests away. It just makes for generally overall stronger plants. So if things are starting to impact your plant, whether it's whether it's disease, whether it looks weak, or just general things like that, you may have a potassium deficiency. The other thing is if your fruit is small, misshapen, or it lacks flavor, that could indicate a potassium deficiency. Now, that thing when I mentioned about old leaves show deficiencies before younger leaves, and in particular with nitrogen. Now, they say nitrogen is mobile. So a plant can take nitrogen from older leaves and move it to newer leaves. Science is amazing. Don't ask me how. I don't know how. But that's why the older leaves will show a sign of deficiency first, because the younger leaves, they've taken the nitrogen from the older leaves because they need it, but then the older leaves may show signs of a problem. Anyway, I just thought that was cool. So I'm telling you guys how that looks in practice. I'm not sure, but if you're seeing an issue with some of your older leaves on your plant, that could indicate NPK, one of those things. If you're seeing issues with your new leaves that are just coming out, that could indicate something else, like another one of the micronutrients. It may not necessarily be related to nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Just as soon as you see an issue on your leaves, we all just go to Google and start looking for what does this mean? What is wrong with my plant? But just if it's an older leaf, likely NPK. If it's newer leaves, then it's probably something else going on. Okay. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about what can happen if I put a nitrogen high fertilizer on my carrots? What is actually going to happen? So in that particular example, now we remember high nitrogen, it's your up, right? It's your leaves, all your leafy greens. So if you apply that high nitrogen to, do I have one here? Yeah, I have this. So let's say this one is a 12-4-8. It's a high nitrogen. This would be perfect for leafy greens. It's got a good potassium, and it's got high nitrogen. So this would actually be a good one for lettuce and leafy greens and things like that. But what if I apply this to my carrots? It's low in the second number, which is phosphorus, which carrots love because it's a root. Below, down, up, down, all around. So the carrot would love a middle number that's higher. But what if I apply this to my carrots? What would happen? I'll tell you what will happen. You'll have amazing green leaves above for your carrots, but you're not going to get much root development. You'll have, it's like too much leaf, not enough root, right? And when you have a crop like a carrot, you want the roots to be able to be the star, right? You don't want the leaves to be the star. You want the carrot or the roots to be the star. So you'll have, you may end up with, small roots, split roots. They could become hairy. I'm sure you've seen, if you've ever grown carrots before and you've seen that they're either hairy or crooked. Now, split carrots, crooked carrots, there's other causes for that, like condensed soil, or you didn't thin your carrots, but let's just focus on the fertilizing aspect of it. But those are some of the things that can happen. Fibrous roots, they could be bland, poor root quality, forked, misshapen roots, things like that, which is not great, right? So worst case, do a balanced fertilizer. Or something that's targeted to roots, like a 15, anything with a middle high number is good, or a balanced. Now, what about the opposite? What if you give something that likes nitrogen? Like, what if I give my lettuce something that has high P or high K? What's going to happen? Now, this one is less dramatic. This one's less dramatic. Like, it won't necessarily hurt the plant, but it's not going to do it any favors either. Because again, lettuce likes nitrogen. If it doesn't have enough nitrogen, it's not going to produce. It's not going to grow well. It's not going to grow good leaves. It may be healthy, but it won't perform as well as it could. Loves nitrogen. Is for lush leaf development. If it's underfed, you'll see slower growth, smaller leaves. And that's not what you want. That's not what you want if you're growing lettuce. You want lush, big leaves, a happy green leafy plant, which needs nitrogen. And it's one of those things that as soon as you know that what these NPKs mean and what plants need what things, and I keep repeating it to myself, it's the up, down, all around. Up, above the ground, leaves, lettuce, spinach, anything like that. If you're going to eat the top part of the plant, needs nitrogen. Up, down, all around. Down is below. Roots, any kind of root veg. It just needs phosphorus to do well, and fruits and flowers. That's all in the same group. And then your all around is just general all around health of the plant's metabolism. It just deals better, takes up water better, deals better with disease, deals better with pests, just general all around awesomeness. So if you have like a small budget and you need to get one thing for your whole garden, get an all-purpose 10-10-10 minimum. I've got a 20-20-20. I should also tell you what the difference is between that. I had a question the other day from someone in a Facebook group that said, what's the difference between a 4-4-4 and a 10-10-10? And all it's the concentration of the nutrient. That's it. But the other thing is that if your numbers are too low, it's going to take a while for them to absorb the nutrients. Like a synthetic, they're higher numbers. Those water solubles, the plants absorb them immediately. The results are right away, not overnight, but much, much sooner than a lower number organic granular. But anyway, long story short, the numbers are basically the concentration of those nutrients within the product that you're looking at. And I think that's all. I think that's everything I wanted to cover today, guys. I know it's a lot, but as long as you remember that trick, up, down, all around, for those 3 numbers, you know what they are, you know what plants fall into those categories, and if all else fails, use a balanced. Use compost at the beginning of planting time, compost for your soil, and a balanced fertilizer for the whole season, and you'll be good to go. Happy gardening, everybody.